Maybe unless someone owns a dog, no one can truly comprehend the significance and strength of love. I agree wholeheartedly. And to help us both see eye to eye, I'll be showing you adorable dog behaviors that will cheer you up. Welcome to USA Stories channel. Do not forget to subscribe and activate the bell button to receive all new updates. Now let's go to the story. The first is the tale of two dogs that, after their owner had a terrible event, did something horrifying. We make plans for the day when we wake up every morning, but we never know what the day will bring or how it will go. When he woke up, a wheelchair-bound guy from Chimbote, Peru, wanted to walk his dogs as usual. He performed this task nearly every day without any issues, but the morning was different. This man was strolling with one of his best friends that day when all of a sudden he collapsed and struck his head on the ground. The man instantly lost consciousness as a result of the fall. Bystanders had to come to his aid because he was alone with his puppies, so they dialed for a paramedic squad. This group was going to see the most touching thing imaginable. The paramedics came shortly after the emergency call, but what they observed from a distance was very different from what they had imagined. They were surprised to see the dogs there since, having been told that the man was in a wheelchair, they had anticipated seeing another human next to him. Their mouths dropped, but not because of the puppies themselves. Rather, it was what they were doing. The dogs appeared to be attempting to protect the man since they were lying so close to him. Dogs lick wounds to speed up healing. They were treating the guy in a desperate but kind manner by doing the same to him. The man's condition was grave, and when the paramedics arrived at last, they placed him onto a stretcher and hurried him to the ambulance. Then, once more, something unexpected occurred. The man's dogs attempted to push the stretcher as they ran toward the ambulance. The health staff was really upset by this decision, even though it went against their policies to permit dogs. They made the fruitless attempt to drive the dogs away in the beginning. The dog's obvious willingness to move mountains in order to be near their injured owner was evident. Thus, the paramedics showed love by letting the dogs accompany them. The dogs took care of their owner even in the vehicle. It took the man a few minutes to come to. When he opened his eyes, he immediately looked for his puppies, and he could see they were frightened since they were running scared. He assured them that everything would be well by touching them. The devoted dogs were allowed to enter the hospital as guardians and waited outside the room while the medical staff took care of their master. The guy recovered in a few hours and began to regain his strength, but the dogs would not depart from his side. But they were tired too. So at last they took a moment to unwind and laid their heads down by their owner's feet. After seeing how these dogs looked after their owners, everyone in the hospital was really pleased. They accepted dogs as real guards and superheroes, saying that a dog is a man's best friend. Here's another touching tale that highlights the wonderful relationship that dogs and people have. It all began when a woman became ill at home on Bayukata Island in Istanbul, Turkey. Thus, her relatives got in touch with the emergency department right away. The woman's condition didn't get better when the emergency personnel came, so they started giving her first aid and brought her to the hospital so she could receive the attention she needed. Neither of them spotted the woman's dog in the room while they were caring to her. The dog had been extremely agitated the entire time and was aware that something was amiss with her owner. But now she was going to do something bold that would bring her to the attention of everybody. The moment the woman was put on a stretcher was when it all began. The dog leaped out of the home as well, following them as they carried her out and toward the ambulance. If the dog hadn't gotten out, maybe no one would have noticed, but then she started barking and trying to force her way inside the ambulance. It was such a tender and heartfelt expression of fear and love. The paramedics were persuaded, but they were unable to follow protocol and bring the dog along. Everyone was expecting the dog to go back, but what transpired next was incredible. Love can drive humans to accomplish nearly anything, and the dog's reason was pure love and concern for her owner. Thus, the determined dog cast caution to the wind and began rushing after the van as the ambulance sped away. She wished to ensure that she supported her owner in her hour of weakness. The dog chased the ambulance relentlessly at a close distance till she unexpectedly arrived at the hospital as well. Unfortunately, the dog was turned away upon arriving at the health clinic, but she had already traveled too far to turn around, so she waited outside for the woman. The woman was eventually released from the hospital and reunited with her closest friend. Without a doubt, dogs are lovely animals. You will cry at what this dog did in the following chapter. Xiao, 56, was diagnosed with heart disease and hypertension a few years ago. Though he was never alone in his problems, he lived in constant terror that anything may happen to him at any time. His dog, Mau Mau, was aware of his anguish and concerns. You will soon witness the lengths this devoted dog will go to for Xiao. Over time, Xiao's health deteriorated to the point that the doctor informed him one day that he would need to sleep on a ventilator. A touching thing occurred when it was time for Xiao to use the nebulizer for the first time. Even though Mau Mau had seen Xiao use one previously and knew he was ill, everything felt so weird to her. However, Mau Mau hurried to his side as Xiao covered his nose with the ventilator. Then she rested her head on his chest, dread and concern etched vividly in her eyes. She kept gazing at him after that, as though to suggest, "Everything is fine. I'm here right now." Every night, Mau Mau has refused to accept Xiao's assurances that everything is well and she is free to leave. Xiao realized his dog was anxious. Mau Mau never gets out of bed until Xiao wakes up. She runs to his side and rests her head on his chest every time Xiao puts on his breathing device. She decided to watch out for Xiao while he slept. That's quite the cute puppy, huh? However, Mau Mau isn't the only adorable canine. Here's how this dog won over everyone's affection as well. A woman in Heilongjiang, China was walking her golden dog one day in July 2018 when she passed out unexpectedly. The dog became terrified as the woman collapsed. He touched the woman many times right away, but she remained still. The puppy remained at her side without moving 1 inch. Emergency services were promptly notified by bystanders and arrived within minutes. Upon arriving at the site, the paramedics first avoided approaching the woman due to their fear of the dog's large size. But they quickly began taking care of the woman after seeing the dog wasn't hostile and was only defending her owner. The dog's attitude altered as soon as they hoisted her onto the stretcher. It was evident to everybody that she was pleased that assistance had arrived. The dog insisted on going inside the ambulance despite the paramedics' first refusals, so they eventually had to breach their regulations and let the devoted dog inside. The next thing the dog did surprised the paramedics, who had assumed they had seen it all. When they got to the hospital, the woman was dropped from the ambulance by the golden retriever, who tried very cutely to push the stretcher. The dog waited outside the treatment room while the physicians attended to the patient because she was not permitted inside the hospital due to restrictions. When the woman came to a few hours later, she asked to see her dog, which was an unusual development. She ran like a real guardian when she heard her name, happy that her owner had recovered. The two must have had a surprising and stressful experience since they embraced and let all of their feelings out when they saw each other again. This following story is going to blow your mind if you believe you've seen it all. Dogs are devoted and will fight valiantly for people they care about. After her owner, Senturk, was brought to a hospital in northern Turkey, one dog, Bonkuk, went above and above in proving this. Bonkuk was unable to accompany Senturk when an ambulance arrived at her house to pick her up, since she had unexpectedly become unwell. But the dog wasn't permitted into the hospital when they arrived. When this occurred, Bonkuk took an incredible action. She was obviously waiting for her owner to go because she was sitting outside the hospital's entrance. Although, regrettably, the woman was not released that day, Bonkuk persisted. She began going to the hospital every day at 9 in the morning and didn't leave until dusk. In the days that followed, Bonkuk gained popularity in the area around the hospital. However, she did something that increased her notoriety and affection. A few days later, Insi Öztürk, Senturk's daughter, brought Bonkuk home. Everyone was astonished to learn that the devoted doggo would still be around the next day, racing to the hospital entrance to occupy her normal spot, even though they had all assumed she would be gone. All by herself, she had escaped from her house and made her way to the hospital. Everyone's love for her increased after this deed. When Senturk was eventually released from the hospital after a few days, Bonkuk was overjoyed to see her and her puppy. She persisted on waving her tail. There is a proverb that goes, "Buy a dog, feed it, and keep it around if you want someone to love you forever." Has your dog ever supported you during a medical emergency? How did they act? Liz was ruled dead by the physicians the moment she was born. As her mother went to the morgue a few hours later, she saw something unreal as she held the small girl's hand. When Analia and Fabian found out they were expecting their fifth child, a girl, they were ecstatic. They made the decision to call it quits and concentrate more on parenting their children going forward. There had been no difficulties from the start of the pregnancy, and Analia prayed that this would continue. Regretfully, things quickly went south. She went into labor 3 months ahead of schedule and was hurried into the operating room for an urgent C-section. Analia couldn't stop worrying before to receiving anesthesia. Though she prayed hers wouldn't end up that way, she had heard of a few preterm kids who died at delivery, but nature had other ideas about her. There were no indications of life in the infant when the physicians delivered her. They quickly pronounced the infant to be stillborn and took her to the morgue. However, they made a costly error. They never paused to consider if it was appropriate to allow the couple to meet the deceased girl. They would all regret their rash decision in a few hours. The doctor informed the little girl's parents of the terrible news after the body had been transported to the morgue. The reality was so horrible that they started crying uncontrollably. If Analia had had even a minute or two more with the kid before she died, it would have meant the world to her. Sadly, the young girl departed without saying hello or goodbye. Her parents' greatest regret was this. It took 12 hours for any attempts to see the girl to be successful. By then, it would be time for Analia and Fabian to go to the morgue and spend their last moments with their deceased child. The pair, doing their hardest to hold back their emotions, were supported by someone as they made their way to the morgue hand in hand. Even though they had never truly met, they only intended to express their gratitude to the girl and utter some kind words. They were also going to swear to keep her in their prayers at all times. They had assumed that their reunion would be quick, straightforward, and tear-free. Analia grabbed her sister's phone before they headed to the morgue so she could snap a photo of the infant for the burial and save it as a keepsake. When they arrived, Fabian went to the coffin while Analia set up the camera. He took a deep breath and then pried off the lid to reveal something they would never have guessed was within the coffin. Analia reasoned that if it was a prank, it was too costly and that whomever or whatever was pulling it off ought to stop. However, with a second glance, she noticed the same thing. The tiny child was breathing and had even opened her eyes, so she wasn't fooled by her own eyes. When I lifted the lid, I noticed a little 5-fingered hand. After touching it, I revealed her face. A little cry was then heard by me. I told myself I was only dreaming. I stepped back then and watched her wake up. She seemed to be saying, "Mommy, you've come for me," said Analia. Not to be outdone, Fabian continued murmuring to himself, "It's my imagination. It's my imagination." However, it wasn't. Yes, their girl was still alive, but how exactly had she lived for 12 hours without any medical support? Her parents wondered, but they were still in too much of a fog to ask questions or even feel angry. All they wanted to say was thank you, God, for returning their daughter. They'd had to count their losses not too long ago, but now they got this daughter back, a second opportunity to love and adore. Fabian sprung into action, snatching the girl from her sobbing mother and sprinting to the hospital. He cried out for help to rescue his child at the top of his lungs as soon as he arrived at the newborn unit. The young child was freezing there in his arms, and he thought he was holding an ice bottle. Everyone had heard the news by then, and the hospital was in a state of chaos. Thus, how did this mistake even come to be? A group of medical professionals had earlier declared the girl dead. How could none of them, not even one, have noticed some life in her? Even worse, why didn't her parents approve of her hasty trip to the morgue? The doctors were unable to provide adequate answers to the numerous queries. The couple claimed that the birth procedure lacked professionalism. The girl was sent to the morgue as soon as she was delivered. Analia received her daughter's death certificate 20 minutes later. Whether the baby was dead or alive, she ought to have been holding it in her arms, not some strange piece of paper. All the fury she'd suppressed returned suddenly. Why wasn't she allowed to spend some time with her child before being taken away? My kid was in a casket at 11:05 after she was delivered at 10 o'clock. She froze at the morgue for 12 hours. I observed the ice covering her body, she narrated. The couple notified the proper authorities about the case. They conducted a thorough study into the hospital's operations. Ultimately, while more inquiries were conducted, all of the employees engaged in the case were placed on leave. The head of the hospital said that Luce was born without any vital signs. The physicians speculated that she could have lived in the morgue because of a change in metabolism brought on by the lower temperatures. After Analia and Fabian changed the intended name of their daughter from Lucia to Luz Milagros, which translates to miracle light. In the days that followed, Luz's condition became better. It seemed sense that her parents transported her somewhere else rather than having her treated at the hospital, where she had been mistakenly pronounced dead. Prior to being discharged home, she had 10 weeks of intensive care at the hospital. Her health did improve, but because of her fragility, the physicians cautioned her family that she would require ongoing care. Everything proceeded smoothly for the following 8 months. Though everyone would have liked for things to stay that way, they didn't. Luz became seriously unwell 2 months after becoming 1 year old. Analia hurried to the hospital while clutching her infant, just like the first time. The girl was still alive back then, but now it appeared like she was prepared to say goodbye. Like was the only difference. As soon as Luz got to the hospital, she suffered a heart arrest. Sadly, she died since the physicians were unable to rescue her. She passed away from shock brought on by disseminated intravascular coagulation and multiple organ failure, according to the hospital's Secretary of Health. She experienced developmental issues and was diagnosed with, before she passed away, microcephaly. In an attempt to gather money, Ellie and Fabian planned to take their daughter to China for stem cell therapy. Doctors, however, never approved of the trip due of Luz's precarious condition. Sadly, this choice proved to be fatal for her. It's tragic that the girl's parents lost her twice. In spite of how hard she battled, daughter parents are happy that they got to spend a year with daughter, despite the sad loss. She was a joyful girl now, a survivor who had overcome all difficulties, in their memory. If she had passed away the first time, they would not have been able to say any of this. But today, if they were given a book to write a biography on, I'm sure there wouldn't be any blank pages. Both her parents and siblings would have lovely things to say about Luz. What aspect of little Luz's tale most inspires you? Simone Paul was no typical young lady. This girl, who was abandoned at an early age and had a kind heart, would meet by coincidence and have a profound impact on the lives of 4 other individuals. That's how it transpired. In a tiny town, Simone and her mother resided in a peaceful area. Despite their poverty and Simone's fatherlessness, they were a happy family. They more than made up for their dearth of worldly possessions with their love and support. Great things to do in their daily lives included taking long walks in the park, watching sunsets, and appreciating the small things in life. Simone, who was raised by a single mother, was never granted the sister she had so much desired. Anything may go wrong at any time. This was Simone's experience when she stayed at home sick while her mother went for her regular stroll. When a drunk driver lost control of his car, she was killed right away. The most trying period of this girl's life was the months that followed. Simone battled valiantly to remain in the home her mother had left her, desperately hoping to escape going into foster care or moving in with her relatives. At the age of 17, she made the decision to leave school and look for employment in order to support herself because the funds her mother had given her would soon run out. At the nearby senior community, Simone had previously volunteered. She enjoyed working with the elderly. Therefore, her goal was to become a nurse someday. While she did conduct their errands, she spent much of her time sitting with them, listening to their anecdotes of bygone days or reading to the ones who were visually impaired. The administration of the senior home made her an offer for a permanent position after learning about her situation. At least it would put some food on the table, even though they could not pay her much. She happened upon a really old wallet on the sidewalk outside the drugstore one day while doing her errands. She discovered it belonged to one of the retirement home's residents when she picked it up. Mr. Blakely was an odd elderly guy who stayed to himself most of the time. Simone did not grasp the sort of melancholy that was on his face. All she knew was that he never received any visits. He was much relieved when Simone gave the wallet back to Mr. Blakely. In addition to being stuffed with cash, The wallet held a lot of personal significance for him. Though he kept it a secret from Simone, he wanted to give her something in return for her candor. The girl and the elderly guy would go on to have a unique bond that started with that visit. Simone somehow managed to get beyond the heavily guarded doors of his heart and glimpse the true Mr. Blakely. Her neighbor's house has been unoccupied for over a year. One afternoon, Simone came home to see that her new neighbors had finally moved in. She stepped over, curious to see who they were. She could see a solitary figure through the window standing in front of the stove, but when she knocked, a little girl, maybe 5 years old, answered the door. Thomas and Lily were the new neighbors. At the age of 17, Thomas was taking care of his younger sister. The stench of burnt food was a dead giveaway that this child was having difficulty with his obligations, despite his best efforts to manage. Over a dark coffee, Thomas and Simone hit it off. Thomas told his mother, his younger sister, and himself the tale of how he moved to a new town to get away from his violent father. Then he mentioned that his mother was very ill and required surgery to survive. She was upstairs. Sadly, they lacked the funds to cover the expense. Simone soon established herself as a frequent guest and developed feelings for Lily, whom she perceived as her imaginary younger sister. Simone was overjoyed to get her first paycheck on the day it finally came, but as soon as she saw the sum that had been given to her, which was double what they had agreed upon, she rushed straight to the director of the nursing home to report a serious error. The matron's reaction to her was that one of the residents had chosen to pay her an additional sum of money each month. Simone went grocery shopping that afternoon for her neighbors as well as herself. Lily began to cry that afternoon as she brought the dinner. It had been a long time since they had eaten a nice dinner. Simone met their mother around a month after she first met Thomas and Lily. She quickly saw that she could assist her more than her novice children because of her extensive expertise of caring. She would stop over every day after work to tend to the mother who was bedridden. To make her life as simple as possible, she would give her a bath, take care of her hair, and do some general housework. She would eventually become accustomed to Simone's visits, in spite of her early objections, and the melancholy on her face would vanish when she was with her. Despite her difficult upbringing, Simone's life began to improve, and she now had some priceless friendships. She felt a particular connection to Mr. Blakely. He was almost her grandfather. Despite being wealthy, he did not appear to be happy with his life. He told her that when she was 18, he forbade his only daughter from marrying a very reckless man, and she ran off with him. A year later, his wife passed away from heartbreak since they were never able to locate their daughter again. She was very fond to Lily and her mother, and she had a second friendship with Thomas. As they sat on the porch one evening, Thomas confided in Mary. He informed her that his father had made his mother's life extremely difficult. She had put in a lot of effort to attempt to support the family and make up for his extravagant spending habits. She had a back injury while working a job that required her to lift large goods. It was now happening slowly, a paralysis. It would be too late to save her if she didn't have surgery soon. Simone could not be silent. She sought Mr. Blakely for a loan without telling Thomas about her intentions. She was aware that Thomas's mother needed the surgery immediately. Despite her assurances to repay the debt, Mr. Blakely refused to meet her demands. Rather, he proposed to cover the cost of the procedure. His daughter had left a gap that Simone had filled, and he would stop at nothing to ensure her happiness. When Simone broke the wonderful news to Thomas, Lily, and their mother, they were all in shock. In a week, the life-saving procedure was scheduled. This three-person family was incredibly appreciative of all that Simone and Mr. Blakely, the benefactor, had done for them. Thomas made the decision to go personally thank the elderly guy who had so kindly paid for his mother's surgery for this very reason. Ultimately, the medical professionals were quite certain that she would fully recover. When Thomas arrived at the retirement community, he was shown to Mr. Blakely's room. An elderly man with gray hair was seated there in the corner, gazing out the window. There was something familiar about his profile. When Thomas gently knocked on the door, he was told to have a seat. Thomas thanked Mr. Blakely for covering the cost of the procedure while crying. He planned to get a job and reimburse the surgical costs after his mother recovered and was ambulating. He, his mother, and his younger sister got a newfound opportunity at happiness because of this generous act. After his emotions subsided, Thomas studied the lone picture by Mr. Blakely's bed. He was startled to discover that he had previously seen this image after initially believing that his eyes were playing tricks on him and wiped away his tears. It didn't take Thomas long to figure out that the picture was of Mr. Blakely on his wedding day. Thomas remarked, "Mr. Blakely, I believe you to be my grandfather. Although I came to thank you for covering the cost of the procedure, I believe I discovered something more worthwhile today. The identical photo is next to my mother's bed. It was the only item she had left of her parents, she had once told me." A man and his daughter met again in the local hospital after nearly 40 years apart. They both felt a tremendous deal of regret for the choices they had made, which had spared each other years of needless suffering. Rebuilding his connection with his daughter and his grandkids was a priority for Grandpa Blakely, who also maintained a watchful eye on the growing romance between Thomas and Simone, the girl who had assisted them in finding their long-lost family. What a touching tale, and to think that it was all due of a misplaced wallet. Have you ever seen a small gesture make a lasting impact on someone's life? Leave a comment below to let us know. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you later. Nicole and Ellie. A black cat is typically associated with ill luck in mythology. It's less obvious, though, what happens to a person who encounters a highly unusual black cat. Our imperfections might sometimes be what make us special and attractive. Ellie and her sister were found at a nearby farm when they were just 4 months old by Nicole, a German resident. They need medical attention since they had infections and mites in their ears, along with other horrible health issues. Nicole made the decision to bring them home and tend to their medical needs. The coats of the two cats were speckled with black and white. Nicole saw specks of white hair where Ellie's fur had originally been completely black just after Ellie turned 1 year old. White spots were showing up day after day as time passed. Nicole brought Ellie to the vet so the marks on her fur could be examined. It was then that she learned Ellie had vitiligo, an uncommon illness. Patches of skin or hair may lose pigment as a result of this illness. Ellie changed her fur every day in front of her owner, not caring at all and growing more and more gorgeous. It is just what Ellie did. Nothing unique about her tuxedo coat, just like her sister's. Nicole was shocked to find that Ellie's coat was gradually turning white in the weeks and months that followed, especially the black areas. Ellie's look seems to be shifting constantly. Why do you suppose this was taking place? It turns out that Ellie has vitiligo, an uncommon disorder that results in white areas of skin and hair due to a lack of pigmentation. Ellie was otherwise quite healthy, however, it is occasionally associated with other health problems. What was only a few white spots on Ellie's body quickly grew into something really lovely. Ellie's look seems to be shifting constantly. Ellie had changed dramatically physically, but her gentle personality stayed the same. She is as charming and lively as the day Nicole brought her home. Ellie gets the same treatment from her sibling whose coat hasn't altered at all. The fact that Ellie is well and content is, of course, what really counts. She is much more endearing because of her unique appearance, which hasn't diminished yet. Although Ellie's fur is still becoming white, Nicole believes that certain black markings, like the ones on her face, will linger. But looking back, it's evident that she has already made significant progress. It has made living with her all the more joyful, and Nicole is thrilled to watch her rescued cat's gorgeous makeover. Ivory Canadian nursing student Gabriella Carvalho went to a cat shelter in Calgary, Alberta. Shortly after Luna, her 5-year-old emotional therapy cat, passed away from feline illness, she disappeared. In order to return some cat food that she had bought before Luna became ill, Gabby went to the shelter. Maybe some cat therapy would be very beneficial to Gabby's heart, she reasoned. She saw Ivory, a stunning, tiny white cat with heart-shaped eyes, looking at her as she walked by the glass containing all the kittens. Thus, she inquired as to whether she might spot a cat in the meet-and-greet space. Life sometimes provides us with what we need, even if the visit was intended to be therapeutic and she had no plans to bring one home with her. Ivory emerged, approached her, and promptly settled into Gabby's lap, emitting a loud purr akin to that of a pigeon. Even though Ivory had a distinct purr, beautiful eyes, and a funny curled tongue that immediately won Gabby over, It was the fact that Ivory wasn't a Canadian cat that convinced her without a shadow of a doubt that she should bring her home. Ivory is from the same Jordanian town where Gabby lived for 6 months before. Ivory was a little white cat with short hair who was 10 years old when Gabby fell in love with her and decided to adopt her. Gabby noticed something quite odd about Ivory not long after she moved into her house. On certain days, Ivory's eyes are a vibrant orange and yellow, while on others they are a neon green and yellow. Gabby noticed that Ivory's eyes, which are often more frequent in people, had a tendency to change color based on the weather. It took Gabby a long time to figure out that young Ivory had heterochromia, a disorder that causes her eyes to shift color. Since hardly every cat had this talent, Gabby's affection for her increased as a result of this new feature, rather than decreasing. People usually stop to gaze in awe at Ivory's stunning eyes when she goes out with Gabby. Ivory's dental condition has left her with few remaining teeth. She primarily consumes wet food that has been combined with bone broth to make it more liquid due to her shorter lower jaw. She follows a particular wet food regimen that resembles a raw food diet quite a bit. Even at her age, Ivory is a lively cat. She enjoys chirping when she watches birds and chases squirrels. She consumes food and likes quail eggs and treats even though she hardly has any teeth. Ivory has brilliant neon green and yellow eyes on some days, and because of her heterochromia, on other days the color shifts to bright yellow and orange. Cats with this syndrome may develop bichromatic eyes, with one eye often being blue and the other green, brown, or yellow. Both people and dogs may be affected by the illness. Because the iris lacks the pigment known as melanin, a kitten's eyes typically look blue at birth. The pigment is dispersed as the cat grows, changing the color of its eyes. While some cats' eyes continue to remain blue due to a lack of melanin development, the eyes of others get darker, with copper being the darkest hue. When a cat has heterochromia, on the other hand, just one iris has pigment spread throughout, making the other iris blue as it grows darker. Although the actual explanation of this odd phenomena is unknown, it seems to be a developmental disorder that may have a hereditary component. Although white cats with one or more blue eyes are more likely to be deaf, the ailment has no effect on the cat's vision and doesn't appear to influence their hearing. Complete heterochromia refers to the state where the eyes are entirely different hues. Sectoral heterochromia, on the other hand, refers to the condition where a single iris comprises two or more colors, for example, half of which are green and half of which are blue. Bruce and Catherine. Cats are such amazing creatures. With just one little mew, they can bring even the most hardened individuals to their knees. Even on stormy days, they have the ability to quickly brighten any day and give the impression that the sun is beaming, but surely they can't alter their color. A small, drenched critter was crawling along the road in Auckland, New Zealand in 2015 when Catherine Van Beek saw it during a violent downpour. At first, Catherine believed the animal to be a tiny, moist mouse, so little, in fact, that she nearly missed it. As Catherine hurried over, she saw that, sure enough, the animal was a newborn kitten that appeared to be just a few hours old. The kitten was nearly dead and trying to crawl across the walkway, but his mom was nowhere to be seen. The kitten was so little that a thin layer still covered its eyes. The wet kitten was immediately taken home by Catherine, who could not bear to leave it alone. She originally believed that he had a high chance of surviving. But throughout the course of the following several days, his illness worsened. He weighed barely more than 100 grams. Despite the fact that the small ball of fur had a lot of odds against him, Catherine was resolved to do everything in her power to support him in his battle for survival. In order to ensure that her little buddy received the essential nutrients, she began giving him formula around the clock and made sure he always had a qualified babysitter on hand to watch after him. The little kitten purred for the first time on the 13th day, which was a very joyous day for Catherine. When the kitten opened its little eyes for the first time, she was a proud mother and named him after Bruce Wayne, or Batman, who had to leave his parents when he was a young boy. Bruce's fur began to turn blue after 6 weeks of non-stop feedings and several medical visits, marking the end of his hairy gray phase. His eyes went from blue to green as well. What caused this to occur? His chameleon-like coat shift was thought to be the result of a fever coat, a condition that occurs during pregnancy when the mother cat is ill or under stress. It produces a patch of gray, cream, or red fur, but it gradually goes away. Bruce's coat was a jet black color by the time he was 3 months old. He began to dance all over the place like a child high on candy. After Catherine posted Bruce's tale online, updates on his several trips to the emergency veterinarian and his battle to survive at such an early age without his mother attracted a sizable and devoted following. He has over 23,000 followers on his regularly updated Facebook page. Shortly after, he started a blog that was ranked as the 89th best cat blog of 2016. His followers are spread over the globe, with the most of them being middle-aged ladies who reside in the US, Germany, the UK, Mexico, Spain, Thailand, India, Japan, and Israel. Fans who are devoted to Bruce may purchase apparel and other items with his likeness. He enjoys playing battles with his older sister Jaeger and exploring the outdoors with his mother. At first, Jaeger wasn't pleased to have a new cat in her domain, but they quickly became the closest of friends. Bruce saw Jaeger as a kind of mentor who taught him everything a cat could possibly need to know. Bruce quickly developed into a lively and active cat. The same fighting spirit that had kept him alive as a newborn persisted in him. Bruce is a big help in the garden and enjoys dressing up as Santa whenever possible. Bruce grew up, became joyful, and gained good health after overcoming his upbringing. Catherine was even motivated to write a children's book on Bruce. Even if Bruce occasionally follows his own path, he always finds time to express his gratitude to his mother, and Catherine likewise makes care to do so. Catherine is incredibly proud of all that he has accomplished. They were fortunate to have met. Have you heard of a cat that had color changes? What caused that to happen? Tell us in the comments section below. We'd love to hear from you. I appreciate you seeing. I'll see you later. Please remember to subscribe to our channel, give us a thumbs up, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our videos. If you enjoyed the tale, the next video that plays on your screen will probably move you too.